Hello, welcome to Introduction to Geology. I'm Dr. William Patterson. In this module, we will discuss the use of geodesy to back-calculate the formation and breakup of Pangaea and Rodinia, two ancient supercontinents. When talking about plate tectonics, one of the things we need to consider is how fast do these plates move? And do they all move the same speed? We need to figure out a way to do this to determine the speed or speed limit of plate movement. So starting with World War II, part of the military effort that the U.S. placed on protecting shipping across the North Atlantic, the Navy developed extremely sensitive magnetometers. These magnetometers were designed to detect submarines, but with some modification, it enabled people to measure the magnetic field of the Earth in great detail. In this case, the magnetic field generated by the seafloor. By steaming back and forth across the Atlantic thousands of times, you can generate a model of the magnetic field of the rocks at the seafloor. In most cases, when moving from east to west or west to east, they noticed a predictable change in the magnetic field, increasing and decreasing in strength and reversing, changing completely. These long, narrow, parallel bands are known as magnetic anomalies, and they're more or less symmetric in the Atlantic Ocean at least. This is one of the primary discoveries that led to the solidification of the plate tectonic theory, the seafloor spreading aspect. So it turns out the rock record of magnetic reversals on land, these magnetic anomalies are proof that the magnetic field does not remain the same through Earth history. And not only does it increase and decrease in strength, but as mentioned a minute ago, it also changes and flips. And this represents a reversal in the Earth's magnetic field when the Earth's magnetic North Pole becomes the Earth's magnetic South Pole. Today, the magnetic North Pole is cruising around the high latitudes. It's not coincident with the Earth's geographic North Pole or rotational North Pole. It's off by some amount that varies by the minute. So going back to the early 60s, scientists discovered that you could obtain a record of the Earth's magnetic field from layers of lava flows, like the Columbia River basalts or the Deccan traps of India. So when these lavas cool and crystallize, they lock in the magnetic field when they reach what's called the Curie Point, or Curie Temperature, is the temperature below which iron-bearing minerals become magnetized permanently. This record is locked in as thermoremanent magnetization because the cold lava can remember or recall the magnetic field when it reached that Curie Point. By measuring these magnetic fields in hundreds or thousands of locations around the world, which is fairly simple to do and fairly inexpensive, they generated what's called a magnetic timescale for the past 200 million years. We can take a closer look here at the timescale for the last 5 million years, and we'll see that about half of all volcanic rocks are found to be magnetized in a direction opposite from the Earth's present magnetic field. This implies that the Earth's magnetic field flips frequently over geologic time, such that normal fields like today's and reversed fields like in the past are equally likely to occur. Major periods during which the field is normal or reversed are known as magnetic crons, from the Greek word for time. These crons usually last about 500,000 years or so, though the pattern becomes irregular as we move further back into geologic time. Within the major crons are short-lived reversals, which we refer to as magnetic subcrons. And these can last from several thousand years to about 200,000 years. This straight pattern in the seafloor was kind of confusing until about 1963, when Vine and Matthews got together. Independently, two Canadians got together, Morley and Laurasia, and they stated, based on the evidence of these reversals, that the bands of high and low magnetic intensity on the seafloor would correspond to bands of rocks that were magnetized during ancient episodes of normal and reversed magnetism. So this means that when a ship with a magnetometer passes over rocks that are magnetized in a normal direction, it will record a stronger local magnetic field as a positive magnetic anomaly. When it was above rocks magnetized in the reverse direction, it will record a locally weaker field or a negative magnetic anomaly. Thus, the seafloor spreading hypothesis explained these observations in a really elegant way. When the plates move apart at a mid-ocean ridge, magma is going to rise from the Earth's interior and flow into this rift, cool off, solidify, reach the Curie Point, and become magnetized in the direction of the magnetic field at that time. As the seafloor spreads away from the ridge, approximately half of the newly magnetized material moves to one side and half to the other, forming two symmetric magnetized bands. Newer material is going to fill the rift, continuing the process. This is how the seafloor acts as a magnetic tape recorder, recording the history of the opening of the oceans, and thus the movement of the plates away from that spreading ridge. So to infer seafloor ages and relative plate velocities, we use the ages of magnetic reversals that have been worked out from magnetized lavas on land. Thus, geologists are able to assign ages to the bands of magnetized rocks on the seafloor. They could then calculate how fast the seafloor was spreading by using the formula speed is equal to distance plus time, where distance is measured from the mid-ocean ridge axis and time equals seafloor age. So as an example, the magnetic anomaly pattern shown here shows the boundary between the Gauss normal chron and the Gilbert reversed chron, which was dated from lava flows at 3.3 million years of age. It's located about 30 kilometers away from the crest of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, just southwest of Iceland. Therefore, the seafloor spreading has moved the North American and Eurasian plates apart by about 60 kilometers in 3.3 million years, giving a spreading rate of 18 kilometers per million years, or 18 millimeters a year. On a divergent plate boundary, the combination of the spreading rate and the spreading direction gives the relative plate velocity, which is the velocity at which one plate moves relative to another. The plate tectonic speed record is found in the East Pacific Rise just south of the equator, where the Pacific and Nazca plates are separating at a rate of about 150 millimeters a year, almost 10 times faster than the rate in the North Atlantic. A rough average spreading rate for mid-ocean ridges around the world is about 50 millimeters a year, convenient number. That is approximately the rate at which your fingernails grow, also convenient. So geologically speaking, the plates move pretty fast. Mapping of these magnetic anomalies on the seafloor has been an amazingly effective and fast way for working out the history of ocean basins. Simply by running a ship back and forth over the ocean surface, measuring the magnetic fields of the seafloor, and correlating the pattern of magnetic anomalies with the magnetic timescale, geologists have been able to determine the age of various regions of the seafloor by remote sensing. This means they don't have to directly sample the crust far below the surface. This is a way of replaying and reading the magnetic tape of seafloor spreading. In 1968, the deep sea drilling project began, and this involved major U.S. oceanographic institutions as well as the National Science Foundation. Subsequently, a number of other nations joined the effort, and this has been one of the major scientific programs of the last half century. In this project, cores were brought up from the seafloor from thousands of locations around the world. Small particles falling through seawater, starting as dust from the atmosphere, as well as organic matter from marine plants and animals, accumulates as seafloor sediment on ocean crust as soon as it forms. Therefore, the age of the oldest sediment in a core immediately lying on top of the crust tells geologists how old the crust is at that spot. The ages of the sediment can be calculated from the skeletons of tiny single-celled planktonic organisms that live at the surface of the open ocean, sinking to the bottom when they die. Geologists determined that the ages of the samples in the drill cores increased with distance from the mid-ocean ridges, and that the age of the samples at any one place agreed almost perfectly with the age of the seafloor determined from the magnetic reversal data. This correlation validated the magnetic timescale and provided strong evidence for seafloor spreading. A few years ago, I was honored by a former undergraduate student of mine, now known as Dr. Bowman, who named a species of plankton after me. And if you look closely, you will notice the resemblance.
Say hello to my little friend!
Now, we can also measure plate movements using geodesy. Astronomical positioning, the measuring of positions of points on the Earth's surface in relation to fixed stars in the sky, is a technique of geodesy, the science of measuring the shape of the Earth and locating points on its surface. You may remember from Eratosthenes' experiments. Surveyors have used astronomical positioning for centuries to determine geographic boundaries on land, and at sea, sailors have used it for hundreds to thousands of years for navigation. 4,000 years ago, Egyptians used astronomical positioning to place the pyramids, Stonehenge, and the standing stones of Callanish are famous astronomical calendars that use geodesy. Because of the high accuracy that would have been required to observe plate movements directly, geodetic techniques didn't play a role in the discovery of plate tectonics. However, we can now use this technique to look at the fine details of plate movement. So up to this point, geologists had to rely on evidence of seafloor spreading from the geologic record. magnetic anomalies, and the ages of fossils that we had just mentioned, including foraminifera. However, in the late 70s, an astronomical positioning technique was developed that used signals from distant quasi-stellar radio sources, called quasars. These are picked up by enormous radio telescopes. This technique can measure intercontinental distances to an accuracy of about a millimeter. In 1986, a team of scientists using this method demonstrated that the distance between radio telescopes in Europe, in this case Sweden, and Massachusetts in North America, had increased 19 millimeters a year over a period of 5 years, very close to the rate predicted by geologic models of plate tectonics. Today, the Great Pyramids of Egypt are not aimed directly north, but slightly east of north. The reason for this error is not bad astronomy by Egyptians, it's that Africa has actually moved. Africa has actually rotated over the last 40 centuries, enough so that the pyramids are no longer aimed at true north. This can, of course, be back calculated. Now, turning to the global positioning system, doing geodesy with big radio telescopes can be expensive, it is expensive, and it's not really practical for looking at plate movements in remote areas of the world where we don't have giant radio telescopes. Since about the mid-1980s, geologists have used an artificial constellation of 24 Earth-orbiting satellites called the Global Positioning System, or GPS, to make the same types of measurements with the same incredible accuracy. The satellite constellation serves as an outside frame of reference, just like the stars and quasars do in astronomical positioning. These satellites emit high-frequency radio waves that are keyed to precise atomic clocks that are on board the satellites. These signals can be picked up by inexpensive portable radio receivers, not much bigger than a textbook. And they're similar, of course, to GPS receivers used in automobiles, smartphones, and my wristwatch. Therefore, geologists use GPS to measure plate movements on a regular basis at many locations around the world. Changes in distance between land-based GPS receivers placed on different plates recorded over several years agree in both magnitude and direction with those calculated from magnetic anomalies on the seafloor. This indicates that plate movements are incredibly steady over periods ranging from a few years to millions of years. Now, this background brings us to the Grand or Great Reconstruction. The supercontinent Pangaea was the only major landmass that existed 250 million years ago. One of the great achievements of modern geology was the reconstruction of the events that led to the assembly of Pangaea and to its later breakup into continents that we know today. So let's take a look at how that works. Starting with seafloor isochrons, this map shows the ages of rocks on the seafloor as determined from magnetic anomaly data and deep-sea drilling. Each colored band represents a span of time when the rocks within that band formed. You'll note that the seafloor becomes progressively older on both sides of the mid-ocean ridges. The boundaries between bands are contours of equal seafloor age, or isochron. Iso meaning same, chron meaning time or age. Isochrons tell us the time that has elapsed since rocks were injected as magma into a spreading zone, and therefore the amount of spreading that occurred since they formed. For example, the distance from a ridge axis to a 100-million-year-old isochron, the boundary between green and blue bands here, indicates the extent of new seafloor created over that time span. The more widely spaced isochrons of the Eastern Pacific signify faster spreading rates there than in the Atlantic, as we had discussed earlier. In 1990, after searching for 20 years, geologists found the oldest ocean rocks by drilling into the seafloor of the Western Pacific. These rocks turned out to be about 200 million years old, only 4% of the Earth's age. In contrast, the oldest known continental rocks are over 4 billion years of age. Thus, all existing seafloor is geologically young compared to the continents. Now, to reconstruct the history of plate movements, we consider that Earth's plates behave as rigid bodies. That is to say, distances between 3 points on the same rigid plate, New York, Miami, and Bermuda on the North American plate, don't change very much, no matter how far the plate moves. But the distance between New York in North America and Lisbon on the European plate increases over time because those two cities are on different plates separated along the mid-Atlantic ridge. The direction of movement of one plate in relation to another depends on two geometric principles that govern behavior of rigid plates on a sphere. First, transform fault boundaries indicate the direction of relative plate movement. With few exceptions, no overlap, buckling, or separation occurs along typical transform fault boundaries in the oceans. The two plates merely slide past each other without creating or destroying plate material. Therefore, the fault orientation measures the direction in which one plate is sliding with respect to the other. Second, Seafloor isochrons reveal positions of divergent boundaries in earlier times. Isochrons on the seafloor are generally parallel and symmetrical to the ridged axis along which they were created. Because each isochron was a divergent boundary at an earlier time, isochrons that are of the same age but on the opposite sides of a mid-ocean ridge can be brought together to show the position of the plates and the configuration of the continents embedded in them as they were in that earlier time. Using these principles, geologists reconstructed the history of continental drift. They've demonstrated, for example, how the peninsula of Baja California rifted away from the Mexican mainland during the last 5 million years. This leads to the Great Breakup, the Breakup of Pangaea. On a much larger scale, geologists have reconstructed the opening of the Atlantic Ocean in the Breakup of Pangaea. Pangaea began to break apart when North America rifted away from Europe about 200 million years ago. The opening of North Atlantic was accompanied by the separation of the northern continents, which are referred to as Laurasia. They separated from the southern continents, which were Gondwana, and the rifting of Gondwana along what is now the east coast of Africa. The breakup of Gondwana separated South America, Africa, India, and Antarctica, creating the South Atlantic and Southern Oceans and narrowing the Tethys Ocean. The separation of Australia from Antarctica and the collision of India with Eurasia closed the Tethys Ocean, generating the world that we observe today. These plate movements have not stopped, of course, so the configuration of the continents will continue to evolve into the future. A likely scenario for the distribution of continents and plate boundaries 50 million years in the future is shown here. How did Pangaea form in the first place? We know from the geologic record in older continental mountain belts, plate tectonics have been operating for billions of years before this breakup. Apparently, seafloor spreading took place just as it does today, and there were previous episodes of continental drift and collision. Subduction into the mantle has destroyed the seafloor created in those earlier times. However, we can rely on older evidence preserved on continents to identify and chart movements of ancient continents, known as paleocontinents. Old mountain belts such as the Appalachians in North America and the Urals, which separate Europe from Asia, can help us locate ancient collisions of the paleocontinents. In many places, the rocks reveal ancient episodes of rifting and subduction. Fossils and rock types also indicate the distribution of ancient seas, glaciers, lowlands, mountains, and climates. Knowledge of ancient climates enables geologists to locate the latitudes at which continental rocks formed, which in turn helps them to assemble the jigsaw puzzle of paleocontinents. When volcanism or mountain building produces new continental rocks, these rocks also record the direction of the Earth's magnetic field, just as oceanic crust does when it's created by seafloor spreading. Like a compass that gets frozen in time, the thermoremanent magnetization of a continental fragment records its ancient orientation and magnetic latitude. Evidence from rock types, fossils, and magnetization has allowed scientists to reconstruct an earlier supercontinent called Rodinia that formed about 1.1 billion years ago and began to break up about 750 million years ago. They've been able to chart its fragments over the subsequent 500 million years as those fragments drifted and reassembled into the supercontinent Pangaea. Geologists continue to sort out details of this complex jigsaw puzzle where individual pieces have changed shape over geologic time. Implications of the Grand Reconstruction are that almost all major components of geology are explained. Economic geologists have used the former fit of the continents to find mineral and oil deposits. By correlating rock formations in which these resources are found on one continent with their pre-drift continuations on other continents. Paleontologists have rethought some aspects of evolution in light of continental drift. Geologists have broadened their focus from the geology of a particular region to a world-encompassing picture. The concept of plate tectonics provides a way to interpret in global terms such geological processes as rock formation, mountain building, and climate change. Over millions of years, movements of the tectonic plates have rearranged the continents and oceans, affecting the climate system in profound ways. Currently, the waters of the Southern Ocean are able to circulate all the way around Antarctica, forming a circumpolar seaway known as the Southern Ocean that isolates the continent from warmer water and air of tropical latitudes. This isolation keeps the southern polar region colder than it might otherwise be, maintaining a massive ice sheet across the entire Antarctic continent. The situation was different during the breakup of Pangaea. 66 million years ago, Australia was still connected to Antarctica, allowing currents of warmer water to flow southward and heat the polar continent. Also at this time, the North and South American continents were separated so that water could flow between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The circumpolar seaway did not form until Australia broke away from Antarctica around 40 million years ago. Somewhat later, only about 5 million years ago, subduction in the East Pacific formed the Isthmus of Panama, connecting North and South America and isolating the Atlantic Ocean from the Pacific. This rearrangement, combined with the collision of India with Asia, forming the high plateau of Tibet, cooled the entire planet enough to create ice sheets of Antarctica in the southern hemisphere and Greenland in the northern hemisphere. The resulting modification of the climate system is thought to have initiated oscillations of climate between very cold periods known as ice ages and somewhat warmer periods known as interglacials that we are living in today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to subscribe.